Hi, so my name is Melinda Miller, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm here to talk to you guys about telehealth and how to hopefully make it work for you. I think a lot of us have been kind of thrown into the telehealth thing really quickly, really suddenly in the last several months. So what I wanted to kind of do was just go over some ways that maybe to help ease the process for you a little bit, to help make things a little easier for you, and just some things to hopefully give you some tools to help make things as we go into the next school year a little bit smoother. All right, so a little bit about me. I work in San Bernardino County right now. I've worked in the city of San Bernardino for about the last 6 years with high-risk youth, but I've worked throughout San Bernardino and Riverside counties over the last 8 years. Like you, I'm still pretty new to telehealth, so I've kind of learned a lot myself over the last few months, and hopefully I can share with you guys something of what I've learned. If we go through, if you have any questions, there should be a space where you can type in your questions, and I will try to answer them as I go along, or I might do so when we're in between sections. So there's different sections, and so I might take the time then to go ahead and answer whatever question has come up. And if there are any questions, then that's totally fine. I think I cover a lot of stuff, but if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in, and my moderator will let me know. Okay. So some limitations and disclaimers. So keeping in mind that this presentation is only an hour and there's a lot of information. So what I'm really going to be doing is just touching base on a lot of things and giving you kind of an overview, especially regarding law and ethics. I'm going to touch base on those areas and give you guys kind of a quick rough and dirty version of that, but there are actually lots of trainings out there. CAMP has a couple of really good ones that I'm going to link for you a little later on in the presentation, and I believe you should have a copy of my slide presentation in a PDF format. So if you have that, I believe the hyperlinks should hopefully work if it's electronic. If not, you should be able to copy and paste it into a browser and pull those up. So there's a couple of trainings that are more in depth in the law and ethics area, and because those are usually 3, 4, 6 hour trainings, we don't really have enough time to go into all of that. So I'm going to give a quick overview of those things and then go ahead and give you some referrals and some links to other places where you can find more information. And also keeping in mind that the COVID-19 situation is very fluid, which means that the rules and regulations are kind of changing. So what we're talking about today could still change in a month from now, 3 months from now. So we just kind of want to all be on the same page, but be prepared for things to change as we move forward. This presentation is informational only, just for educational, to kind of get you guys going. It's not intended to be legal advice or substitute for independent legal advice. If you have specific legal questions, I would refer you to CAMP or a CAMP lawyer or your own lawyer to be able to ask specific questions about a specific situation. So what we're going to be talking about today is a legal and ethical overview and some considerations that you want to take while we go through this. Different platforms and documentation, and I'm probably going to be going through these sections a little bit fast. If you want me to slow down, or if you have a question, just put it up there and I can maybe focus a little bit more. But again, a lot of this information is stuff that you can get in a broader source other places, and I want to make sure we have enough time to really focus on the functionality and giving you a toolkit that you can take with you after today that you can use as you do your own telehealth work. All right, so I don't know about you guys, but maybe this is part of how you've been feeling in 2020. I think that there's been a lot of pressure for us to continue to put a smile on our faces, show up every day, show up for our clients and be very supportive for them, and let them know that everything's fine when everything is really not. A lot of things are going on, a lot of changes are happening, and maybe you're feeling a little overwhelmed and tired, and but you know, we still show up for our clients the way we're supposed to. So sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. Oops. All right, law and ethics. So what is telehealth? So this is the definition straight from the BBS webpage. This is actually copied right from there. And then again, the hyperlink at the bottom is to the page where you can find this information. And it basically is any sort of health service that's provided over any sort of technology service, telephones or internet, of course, the primary sources. However, it doesn't have to be that way. I'm not going to be going into emails and text messages in this presentation. However, there is a camp training that does go into them a bit more. So we're going to be primarily just focusing on telehealth via video or over the telephone and the limits and things like that regarding. You have to be licensed or you have to be registered, and you need to make sure it's within your scope of practice, just like it was if you were face-to-face. And you need to be responsible for knowing all the laws, and you're subject to disciplinary action. So really, telehealth doesn't change anything other than the setting. It just changes the way services are provided. It doesn't change the kind of services that you provide or the level of, what's the word I'm trying to think of? The level of support that you need to have, like, knowing what you need to, knowing what you need to know and knowing the laws and being current in your license and all those things. So all of that needs to stay the same, just as if you were in face-to-face with your client. So these are the different California regulations. So again, they're all hyperlinked, so they're easy for you to kind of click on it and read if you haven't already read them so far. So the Business and Professions Code 2290.5, that's the California regulation. Then 1815.5, that would be for the California Code of Regulations, Standards of Practice for Telehealth. Now, both of these, I don't know about you, but a lot of times when I start reading about regulations and codes, my brain just kind of shuts off and turns off and I just lose interest. But these codes are actually really easy to read. They're only about a page long each, and they're very basic information. So it's not a bad idea to go ahead and make sure you've reviewed them or have a copy of them on hand for yourself. Maybe if a client asks about them, you can give them information just so you know where you're at and make sure you're covering all of your bases. Executive Order N3920. So this is the order that Governor Newsom presented in March that kind of changed everything for us. It's basically the order that stated that if a service can be provided over telehealth, then we're doing it telehealth, and to avoid that face-to-face contact whenever possible. So below that is the link to the BBS statement that includes their kind of guidance on what that looks like and how things changed. We're going to get to that in just a second. So standards of practice, keeping in mind that the standard of practice is pretty much the same again as it is face-to-face. The guidance in 1815.5, so it states that all persons engaging in practice of marriage and family therapy, so it's educational psychology, clinical social work, professional counseling, via telehealth with a client that is physically located in this state. So I want to highlight that and remember that, because we're going to come back to that in a little bit, that you have a valid or current license and registration, just like you would if you were in face-to-face, and that all statutes continue to, and regulations for the BBS continue to be in effect, even if over telehealth, just like if they were face-to-face. So basically, if you're in telehealth, it doesn't release you in any way from any of the standards that you had in face-to-face. In fact, it adds a few more that you just want to be aware of and that you continue to practice the same way. All right, initiating telehealth. So again, right off the BBS webpage, that you obtain a informed consent from the client, that you inform them of the potential risks and benefits, that you provide the client with your license or your registration number, and they document any reasonable attempts to obtain current resources, current emergency services in that client's area. Now, for me, I think probably for many of you, I'm a school-based counselor. So when I moved to telehealth and I was talking to my clients over telehealth, all my clients are still living in the same area, and because I already had their resources and the emergency services, all I really needed to do was check up on, make sure what was still open and what wasn't open. So those are the things you might want to check, because sometimes a crisis clinic might have shut down or temporarily closed or changed their hours. So making sure that you're up to date with what your local area is doing as far as taking considerations for coronavirus. But for the most part, the information is already there. But I did pick pick up a couple of clients outside of my usual area. And so I needed to make sure that I knew what the services were available there. Did they have a crisis team and that was available to them? Did they have any local crisis clinics, or did they have to drive away? To be able to give the information to the client and to the parent. So those are all things that you want to make sure you have. All right, so for each service, and this is actually very similar to regular counseling services, in that you want to make sure that you have the client's name and address. You want to ask them every time. Especially if they're on the phone, you want to verify that it's the client. And there's a video that we have a little bit later on in the presentation. And in the video, it talks about doing a dual verification. That's not really required for California. However, it's not a bad idea, especially if the client is on the phone, finding some way to be able to double verify who they are, so you know you are talking to the client you're supposed to be talking to. You're not talking to their sibling or their friend or something along those lines. So and you want to find out where they're at. I've talked to a couple of clients. I talked to one client. We had a session. I called her at our scheduled time and asked her, okay, well, where are you at? And she was in the car with her family on the way to LA. So that's important information to have. So when we go forward assessing whether or not it's appropriate for the client, telehealth is appropriate, we want to take in consideration, of course, whether or not they're in a healthy psychosocial situation, whether or not they're in crisis, whether or not they're safe. And of course, all those things we want to consider. And if they're not, we want to find a way to give them support. But in the case of my client, where she was in the phone with she was in the car with her family, that was not appropriate. And so I set up with her a time. Okay, this is, even though she was okay with doing a session in the car, I didn't feel that was appropriate because, again, her confidentiality was kind of put out there for everyone to hear. You can't really have a confidential session unless you're in a car with your family members. So, I just let her know, okay, sounds like you're a little busy this time. Let's reschedule. Let's find another time that's a better time for both of us to be able to meet and still maintain her confidentiality. So those are some things that you want to consider, whether or not this time in the situation is an appropriate time to have a telehealth session with your client. And you want to utilize best practices for maintaining client confidentiality each time, and you want to make sure you've documented that. So you make sure you're in a location where no one else is around, that you're in a private space, that no one is hearing what is going on in the session. All right, so COVID-19 brought a few changes. So specifically, it made changes to the California Code 2290.5. And the big thing to pull out of here is that it changes the intensity of the HIPAA compliance. So especially regarding to the platform that you use. So the BBS, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but if you notice, it says notification encourages particular measures to safeguard patient privacy, but does not require such measures covered healthcare providers shall give due consideration. So such as measures and shall endeavor to adopt them to the extent possible. So it kind of releases you a little bit from some of the HIPAA compliant rules, but it does encourage you to follow them whenever possible and as soon as possible. So what specifically does that mean? So basically the BBS is not going to penalize you if there's a breach of, if you're using if there's a HIPAA violation. If you're using a non-compliant platform and you're not 100% HIPAA compliant, the BBS will not fine you or enforce a penalty against you during the COVID-19 public health emergency. So I think that's important to note that this is a temporary change. This is not permanent. And I think it's safe to assume that sooner or later, as we move forward, they're probably going to expect that. They're probably going to expect the HIPAA compliance to come into place sooner or later. This is no longer a brand new emergency. We've now been into it for a few months. And so it's a good thing to kind of keep in mind that moving forward, that we're looking at least another 4 to 6 months, probably. I'm guessing in another year, and even beyond that. I know my clinic has considered continuing to use telehealth in some form or another on a more regular basis now that we've done it, we're used to it, our clinicians are more used to it. So it's something that we can utilize a bit more often. So if that's the case, then we want to make sure you're HIPAA compliant. You want to make sure you're safeguarding your client's information and safeguarding your own career and your own license. Because remember, even though the BBS may not move against you, may not file a petition against you, you have to keep in mind that if your client sues you for malpractice, or if there is a breach of HIPAA information and your client chooses to sue you, you don't really have any safety net there because you were using a non-HIPAA compliant platform. And though that's technically allowed, a judge may not see that the same way. You also want to keep in mind that that COVID-19 regulations are changing frequently, and each county has different regulations. And I'm not going to go into each county's regulations, but whatever county you're coming from, you want to look up what your specific mental health agency is requiring and what their standards are. You're billing with Medi-Cal, if you're billing Medi-Cal or another insurance, what standards they may have. They may still require you to have a HIPAA compliant platform. All right, so knowing and understanding the difference between legal and minimum standard and the best ethical practice. So it's important to keep these ideas in mind, that just because it's a minimum standard, as we continue to go on, we want to keep the best ethical practice. So there's a question: as a school counselor, due to large caseloads, is it appropriate to share with student a time frame for the session, i.e. 20 minutes, 30 minutes? Yeah, absolutely. So depending on the kind of clients I had, and depending on what they can tolerate and large caseloads. So every clinician is responsible for managing their own caseload, and if your supervisor is okay with you shortening some sessions, things like that, then you use your own best judgment on that. So I would definitely prepare kids. There were some kids I knew couldn't do a telehealth session more than 20 or 30 minutes. They just weren't able to sit still long enough or stay focused long enough. So ahead of time, whereas in my office, I might be able to pull them out longer and do an hour-long session, then on telehealth, it's a lot more difficult. And we're going to get into this a little bit more as we get into functionality, but that's a really great question. So, and let me read it one more time in case I didn't read it loud enough before. Basically, the question is, due to large caseloads, is it appropriate to share with the student a time frame for the session? And absolutely, you want to kind of set boundaries for the client as far as, okay, this is your time frame at 3 o'clock to 3:30 and things like that. We're going to get into a little bit more detail in that a little bit later in the slideshow. All right, so seeing clients out of state. So remember, I told you to keep an eye on that one statement, that when you're seeing clients inside the state. It is important to note that if your client goes out of town, which especially during the coronavirus, I had a lot of clients that were going out of state, visiting family. The families took the time to go visit people all over the country. So you need to know that when the client is in another state, the client is actually under the jurisdiction of that state. So if they're in a state that you're not licensed in, then you're actually providing services for a client in an unlicensed format. So you're actually not licensed for them in that case. So it's important to note that some states do provide ability to see a client temporarily if they're just on short-term travel or if you're transitioning them to a new clinician. So, but it's important for you to know what each state's law is. If the client is in that state, know what it is, look it up, find out if you have that ability. Some states don't provide that at all, and you do not want to get yourself into a situation where you're in trouble in providing services in an unlicensed situation, especially if their treatment goes bad and the client, again, wants to file a complaint or file a lawsuit. You have no protection if there's no jurisdiction. The other part of that is on the other end, if I'm in another state. So for example, last week I went and visited some family in Florida. And while I was in Florida, I had a client back here in California that wanted to do a session. So I had a private space in the home that I was staying in, and we, connected Zoom. We had our session. It went great. And we went on with I did my note. We were good. So if the client is still in California, then you're covered. You're good to go. So the jurisdiction is based off of where the client is, not where you are. You could be anywhere as long as you're doing sessions for clients in the state that you're licensed, you're good. Again, I'm going to reference some of the camp trainings because there is the camp training went into this in a lot more depth. So this is kind of a big issue, and this is for anybody who does any sort of telehealth. Okay, platforms and documentation. So these here are the HIPAA compliant platforms. There are a lot of them out there, so this isn't all of them, but these are some of the more major ones you've probably already seen or heard of, specifically Skype for Business and Zoom for Healthcare. Those are both HIPAA compliant. And there's some that are more suited specifically for counseling purposes, therapeutic purposes, and some that are more just video connection that you can use. So it's just really kind of your preference. Some are free, some are not, some are more as a pay as you go. And I know it probably there's some hesitation in wanting to sign up for a telehealth platform that's going to cost money, but you also got to consider when you're looking at the possibility of keeping everything HIPAA compliant and keeping everything safe, that you want to really provide the best security for your clients as possible. So it's a worthwhile investment. And especially, I don't know about you, but for me, I can spend going to time and money going to the Target dollar section or the dollar store and finding all sorts of tools and toys and things like that I can use in my office or my sessions. Well, now this is all over telehealth, so that sort of investment I'm putting back towards a platform that I can use and keep things HIPAA compliant. These are the non-HIPAA compliant, but they are temporarily approved. Again, these aren't all of them, but this is some of them. So Apple FaceTime, Facebook Messenger video chat, Google Hangouts video, Skype, and basic Zoom. So keeping in mind that, you know, especially when all this started back in March and April, and you had a client in crisis and you just hooked up to the free Zoom so that you can see them and you can talk to them and you can make sure they're okay. This stuff you can see came really in handy. But as we continue to go through this emergency, you can see where there might be some difficulties maintaining confidentiality. So the question is Zoom not a HIPAA compliant platform? So there's a difference. So both Zoom and Skype, basic Zoom and basic Skype are not HIPAA compliant, but let me go back a slide. Skype for Business and Zoom for Healthcare is. So the difference would be the business agreement, and I'm going to talk about that in a couple slides from now. So basically, there's a business agreement that you sign with your platform that states whether or not that they're HIPAA compliant, and they go the extra step. So there's the free basic Zoom, which is not HIPAA compliant, but then there is the Zoom that you would actually pay for, and I can't tell you how much it is because I'm doing a group thing with everyone in my clinic, but you actually pay for the Zoom for Healthcare, and that makes it HIPAA compliant. They go through a couple of extra layers of security that makes it HIPAA compliant. And then the other question was, are you aware of FERPA compliant platforms? No, but I believe the ones that are, a lot of these ones that are here that are under HIPAA compliant, I remember doing a training a couple of months ago where they were talking about FERPA and which ones are compliant. So a lot of these fall into that still, not all of them, I believe, but some of them still do. All right, so not approved. These are never approved. Don't ever do sessions on Facebook Live, Twitch, TikTok. Don't ever do those things. I hope you already know that. Don't use Instagram, Messenger, things like that. I hope you already know that those are platforms that are not secure enough. There's far too many opportunities for people to access, and there be a leak of information and confidentiality. So just keep that in mind, that these are definitely the no's, and there's the okay for now, and then there's the these are all good to go. So how do you know it's your business associate agreement? So any of those platforms that are HIPAA compliant, they will offer a business associate agreement, and you can you sign that with them, and it's all legalized, and then you know you're covered by HIPAA. All right, some documentation. Some platforms offer documentation support. Ooh, sorry, my mouth didn't work for that. So in my case, I already have a platform that I use for my documentation. It's completely separate. So that's why Zoom Healthcare works really well for me, because I don't need any documentations on that. We just did the business agreement, and we were good to go. And then I just use my documentation forms on another platform that I've been using all along. Chances are, again, if you're a school-based clinician, a school-based counselor, you already have a platform that you use for your notes, and you can continue to use them, especially if you're using Skype or Zoom or any of those platforms. If you don't already, there are some platforms out there that actually provide them. They actually provide, it's part of the service that they provide, and it's also part of the cost. It's included in the cost, is note format and informed consents and all the documents that you need are there available there, and they're accessible. And in some cases, you can even share them electronically with your client right on the platform. So that makes it really nice. Zoom, I can't do that, so I end up trying to find other ways to be able to send those documents to my clients. But on some of those other platforms, you can just share it right there through the platform, and the client is able to access it, sometimes sign it, and it makes it really nice and easy. All right, so what to document at the beginning of each telehealth treatment. So this is coming back around to what we were talking about with the BBS page on what's needed at the beginning of every single telehealth. So you want to, again, the consent to treatment. So you heard this already before. What you want to include in this is the information that they're saying that you want to give to the client. So you want to be able to go ahead and have in there information about their local emergency services. You want to have in there already maybe your license number when you're giving it to the client. You want to already have in there the risk and benefits of telehealth and what's it like. So what a lot of times I would do is I had that form and I made sure the client either had a hard copy, or I emailed it to them, or I mailed it to them, and had it in front of them as I read through the document, or I'd pull it up on the shared screen and I'd read through it with them and make sure they understood it. And so I make sure I went through all of these. It is important to note that you have to do this with every client at the beginning of every telehealth initiating telehealth overall. Even if you're already seeing that client before you went to telehealth. So I had my regular consents that I get from my clients when I saw them face to face. Then halfway through treatment or partway through treatment, I moved them to telehealth because of COVID-19. So at that point, I needed to obtain a new consent to treatment that specifically went over the telehealth information. So keep in mind, this is in addition to your regular consent. You also want to make sure you're documenting in that very first note. You want to document that you've covered all of this. You want to document that you provided the client with your registration number, that you made attempts to get information for relevant resources. And it might not be a bad idea, especially if you moved a client over from regular service to face-to-face service to telehealth service, that you transition them and why you transition them. So you, I'm assuming that probably at this point that's already been said and done. But if you haven't, or from now on, for example, every new client I get, I'm noting that we're starting off at telehealth due to this situation. I just want to have it documented, and I just want to have it tracked that it's due to the COVID-19 and that it's kind of circumstances outside of my control, which means that I don't have the option of seeing the client face to face. The only option really is telehealth at this point, unless they're in crisis. All right, so document each session. So you want to include this in every note that you have, the date and time of the session. That's pretty similar, I think, to your regular notes. I think that's usually, our notes are usually time-stamped. You want to document the client name and their location and their address. So for example, several of my clients, sometimes I saw them and they were at their home. Sometimes they were visiting grandma. Sometimes they were over at their buddy's house. And even though they were in a private space to do our session, I had to get the address of the new location that they were at. I had one situation where I think it was May, where, it must have been April, where the client was visiting his grandmother and he went into crisis. He was expressing suicidal ideation, self-harming, gave means and all sorts of stuff. And he was in San Diego, and I don't have a lot of the information for San Diego. Thankfully, his mom was present, and I was able to communicate with her, and we were able to coordinate a safe support for that client and get him the help he needed. But it's exactly that kind of information that you need to know. If your client goes into crisis and they're in an area that you're not familiar with, you need to be able to know who you can call and an address of where they're at. At the very least, I could have called 911 and had police and an ambulance show up right at the house. So having the address helped with that. So that's important information to have. And of course, the appropriateness of the telehealth for the client. You want to document that, yeah, it's appropriate or not this time. Should you offer resources at every session? I don't think you need to. I mean, again, I think that is your discretion. I think in the beginning session every time, so even the clients I was seeing on a regular basis, I saw prior to COVID-19, as I moved into telehealth, I re-offered them all new resources, especially since we're in an emergency and food was scarce, especially you guys know what it was back in March and April. Things are really tight. So I wanted to make sure as we entered this new situation, I'm providing my clients with updated resources of food banks that were open, schools that were providing food, things like that, things that were new and updated because some things were closed and some things weren't. I didn't offer that every single session. So unless your client has a need for that, I don't think that's important, that's necessary. So what you'd want to document just every session is your typical things that you would document in any session, and then the date and time, client name and location, and whether or not telehealth is appropriate for them. All right, so a couple questions coming in a little fast. So let me get to the end of this section, and then I'll come back and address some of those questions. Okay, so verbal and written consent. So it is important to note that currently written consent is not necessary when initiating telehealth. Now that's kind of a big change, especially for kids, because usually you always want to get a written consent, but due to COVID-19 and due to the inability to actually see our clients face-to-face at any point, it's much harder to obtain. So verbal consent is necessary, and you want to document that. You want to make sure that in that initial note, when you went over the informed consent with your client, that you documented for sure that your client verbally agreed. And you want to probably note that you obtained verbal agreement due to COVID-19 and that you weren't able to get the face-to-face. I would also go ahead and add in there that that there's an opportunity, that the next opportunity you have to see the client face-to-face, you will obtain physical signature if possible, or in some cases, like with a care plan where a signature is necessary, I would obtain verbal agreement, document that, and I would also mail home a copy of that for the client to hopefully sign and send back. I didn't get many back, but I made that attempt so I could document that attempt. That's not necessary, but again, it's a difference between the minimum standard and best practice and trying to make sure you cover all your bases. You want to make sure that the client is at least given the copy, a hard copy of the informed consent, either electronically or by mail. I lucked out, and I think, again, as a school-based counselor, one of the things that you could do is what I did is I took advantage of the kids coming in and picking up all their computers, and I slipped that informed consent into every single bag that went home with the kids, that they picked up their laptops, so they each had a copy, so that when I met with them face-to-face on telehealth, I asked them to grab that form. They already had it, and we could go over it together. So that gives you that kind of coverage and making sure that they have that hard copy. Okay, so you want to document, so again, kind of documenting the emergency services, or at least having an awareness or document that you've looked for them, or crisis planning for high-risk clients. You want to make sure that, so I was uncomfortable with some of my clients moving to telehealth because they were higher risk, and not being able to see them on a regular basis and check on them as much, or see them at the school, things like that, made me a little nervous. So I wanted to make sure I was more involved for them. I did more crisis planning with their families and their parents. Even though I was doing some of those things before, I was much more aware and connecting with the parents and the families to be aware of what's going on with their kid, and getting them the supports that they needed when I wasn't available. Identifying potential emergency contacts, especially with the parents. So again, I think the majority of us are working with kids. So you want to make sure you have the parent contact. Please make sure you've contacted your parents, that you've talked to them, and that you have their number. Again, with my one client that went into crisis when we were in a session, he was, losing it on our session, I was able to call his mom on my phone, and she was in the other part of the house, and I was able to get her. She was able to meet up with her son. So being able to have that contact I wasn't able to get to him to provide any sort of support, but she was. So you want to make sure you have a phone number of somebody who can be available or nearby to intervene if necessary. Discuss alternative means if there are technical issues. Okay, I'll give you a call if we can't do this over video. Phone calls are okay. And then, and then a lot of this is a little overwhelming. So if you are, okay. So I'll get to these questions in just a second. So these are actually hyperlinked. So hopefully your electronic version of my presentation, you can click on these, and these will take you to the CAMF website where there is a sample informed consent. So if you're feeling a little overwhelmed and feeling like there's a lot of information, how in the world are you going to get it all covered? CAMF actually has you covered. And so my own clinic used this as a template for our informed consent, and you can do the same. It's free and available for you to use. And in addition to that, CAMF also has a sample checklist. So for each and every single one of my clients, I actually completed a copy of this checklist, which goes over those 4 things you need to have at the initiation of telehealth and each thing you're doing in each session, in addition to the informed consent, and each of those were uploaded to each of my clients' files. So that way it was not only documented in my notes, but I also had documentation loaded into the charts that stated that each of these things were covered and the data was covered. So if you didn't already have these already, that's totally fine, but it is something maybe you wanted to put into play moving forward, that you have these documents in the right there on the CAMF website. Okay, so let's check out some of these questions, and then we will get going on the fun stuff. Okay, I already answered the resource question. What about signatures on documentation? How can documents be shown to clients through Zoom? So with at least Zoom, because I know Zoom because that's one I've been using. So I don't know a lot of the other platforms because I haven't used them, but you can share your screen. So I would pull up the document. I would make sure it was blank. So make sure you're not pulling up a document that had another client's name on it or anything like that, because remember, that's a HIPAA violation. I would just pull up the blank document, and then I would share my screen with the client so that they could see it on there. So you can actually just share it. So again, with the signature, we talked about a little bit earlier, it's going to be, you're going to document that you obtain a verbal agreement, and you're not going to be able to get a wet signature until you see the client face to face. And at this point, that's just how it is. And I think the BBS understands that, insurances understand that. I'm in San Bernardino County, so San Bernardino DBH, they understand that. So that's all kind of understood right now. So which is why I want to include that I'm not able to get the signature due to social distancing, coronavirus, and all that stuff. So I'm including that in my documentation. You don't have to. I'm going that extra mile just because I want to make sure I cover all my bases. But yeah, you're not going to be able to get the wet signature. Okay, do you have a sample of telehealth consent? There you go. Here's your sample checklist and sample telehealth. So it's right there on your slideshow as well. Okay, we have a couple of people asked for samples, and there you guys go. There's the samples. Okay, what would make a client inappropriate for service? So that's a good question. So I think it would kind of, again, be your professional opinion. So if a client is in crisis, for example, my one who went into crisis while we were in our session, I directed mom, she needed to take him to the nearest crisis clinic or ER. So she complied with that, and she was able to do that. And whatever I was doing on the telehealth session was not helping him. It was not going to be beneficial for him. And if I continued to try and keep him there, who knows what could have happened. So we needed to change the setting and adjust that. Then there's a situation with my one client where she was in the car with her family. So she was fine mentally, she was stable, everything was going on, but that was not in an appropriate setting. She was in a car with 5 other family members on a freeway heading to LA, and there's no way we could really have a good, true session. I could check on her. How are you doing? Everything going okay? Okay. Anything serious going on? Okay, cool. Let's schedule this for another time. So I think there's any range between any of those things. It is hard because even with our clients, whereas maybe 6 months ago, you could probably say, yeah, I don't know. I think face-to-face is better for you. We don't really have that luxury anymore because there's not a lot of face-to-face clinics open right now. Almost everyone's doing things on telehealth. So I think that definition has gotten a little broader. We just want to make sure that they're in a good state. I would say if a client is under the influence or heavily under the influence, it might be an inappropriate time to have this session. You say, okay, let's reschedule this when you're sober, and things like that. So again, I work with high-risk kids, so I don't know how many of you might have that situation, but it does kind of come up a few times with my own kids, where if they're too much under the influence, then I'm not going to hold a session with them. Okay, someone asked me to go back one slide to the informed consent. Do you guys have, I wish I could see or get reactions from you guys. Do you guys have a copy of the slideshow? Because I was told you guys should have been able to get a copy of the slideshow in a PDF format. And if you do, then you should be able to hyperlink to all these things. What if telehealth services are not appropriate, but the service is mandated by the IEP? So that's probably best discussed by the IEP team. If I were you, I would call an IEP session together and figure out what other alternatives there are. One of my school sites was Dorothy Gibson, where they were all special ed and they all had IEP services. And there was definitely some struggles in working with special ed kids and trying to do telehealth. And yeah, I actually had to get really creative, but it worked out for the majority of my clients. But if you feel in your professional opinion that telehealth is not going to work for them, then I would highly advise that you call together an IEP team meeting and discuss as the team what the next best support for the client would be and what resources were out there. Because I know different counties, I'm not sure what county you're in, but different counties offer different supports and resources to see what else might be out there. All right, please repeat the document form resource. So all the document forms, I'm not sure what you mean by that specifically. Okay, hold on, let me go back. People were asking if PPT is available for download. The answer is yes. You can add it to your briefcase and they can help visit it. Yeah, so yeah, you can, that answer, so the answer is right there. Please repeat the document form resource. So I'm not sure which one you're talking about. The sample forms that I have here, the informed consent and the checklist, you can find those right on the CAMFT website. So if you're not already familiar with CAMFT, it's CAMFT. It's the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, and they're an amazing resource. So even if you're not an MFT, they are an amazing source for resources, and I would highly recommend just going to their website and seeing what you can pull off of there. It's free, it's available. You do not have to be an MFT to access a good portion of it. There are some trainings that might be a little bit more expensive for you if you're not an MFT and you're not already enrolled in CAMFT, but they have a wealth of information. And they also actually have, even if maybe you don't want to do the training with CAMFT, they have access to other training sites that you can maybe use and find other resources on. Okay, so yeah, you guys can save the PowerPoint. So when you guys go to the briefcase, where you can actually save the PowerPoint and you can print it. So that was the question. If you guys have access to it. So if you guys can pull up the PowerPoint or pull it up when we're done, then you should be able to access all these links and just click on them and go right to the sites. If not, at the end, I have the links for CAMFT and you can just copy and paste that right into your browser. But I want to go ahead and get going because we have a little less than a half hour to go and quite a few more slides to go over. So, okay, so functionality, this is the fun stuff. This is stuff I really wanted to kind of talk about. So checking, so basic stuff. Again, these are all things that, oh, in Spanish, no, I do not. One of the resources that I have later does offers resources in Spanish as well as English, but as far as the telehealth, the informed consent, and the checklist, we actually used our own counselors to translate them and got them in Spanish. I might be able to send you some Spanish copies of our own, but I have to get my supervisor's permission to make sure that's okay to send out. So, so you might just want to work on seeing if there's a translator. If I find a link like that, I'd be more than happy to share it. Okay, so use updates instruments who access students who access their curriculum through SPED, not special ed kids. Okay, so, okay, yeah. All right, so staging. So making sure that your background is clean and neat. I'm here at my school right now, and so my background, it's actually not my typical office, so my background is not the background I would have preferred for this presentation, and so I apologize for it, but it is what it is. But at least it's clean, it's somewhat neat. I had to adjust the lighting a little bit to make sure that you could see me and not have a light immediately behind me, things like that. So you want to play with it a little bit. You want to check your eye level. If your camera's at the right level, then you could be actually looking at your client on the screen, and actually looks like you're looking at your client through the camera. So you kind of want to give an idea of making eye contact. You want to be way over here and then, you know, looking off in a weird space. So you want to kind of keep those things in mind. Checking, make sure before you go on, you check your sound. Headphones can assist with confidentiality. So I really liked it when my clients would have headphones on their side, then I knew at least if somebody walked into the room while I was talking to them, nobody else would hear what I just said. So if I said something that was more confidential or more private between the client and I, then that was going to stay safe between us. And on my end as well. So if I wore headphones, then no one else in my house could hear what my client was saying to me. So I was keeping their confidentiality on that. So headphones are a good way to go. You want to limit your distractions as much as possible, and hardwire to your network if possible instead of being over Wi-Fi. So if you're having connection issues, screens keeps freezing up or there's delays, things like that, then you might want to consider plugging directly into your network and not going over Wi-Fi, and that should strengthen your connection so it moves a little bit faster. So here's a great example. The rest of your house can be a complete disaster area, but just make sure what's behind you is nice, clean, and well presentable so that your clients can see a professional background behind you. All right, nonverbal cues. I'm sure you've probably already noticed I use my hands a lot. I am a very animated person, and I use body language a lot. I use a lot with my kids. I use it a lot when I'm playing with them, and I'm moving around a lot. And I'm reading, in addition to that, I'm reading their body language. I'm sure just like me, being a mental health professional or being a counselor, you are reading their cues, reading their body language, and taking those things in. Unfortunately, through telehealth, this is really limited. Now you're only seeing me from here up. You don't see all the other things going on and all the other movements that normally I kind of use my physicality in my sessions, or even recognizing my clients' physicality. So you need to kind of be aware of that. You want to maybe be a little bit more animated. Doesn't mean you have to be jumping and dancing around, but just a little bit more animated to kind of maintain the attention of the client, maintain their focus. You want to be aware of your own expressions. You want to be aware of your attentive face. Sometimes a client is talking and you're just giving them that real serious look on the camera. And again, through a camera, it might look very different than it does when it's just in your office. So you want to be kind of aware of what those things are looking like coming through a camera. And there are a lot of times on these platforms a way for you to check yourself out, look at it, sit down, and make sure you're in the right space and your facial expressions and your body language are in a good place for your sessions. Verbal connection, especially, so you want to check in a lot of times with your clients, especially if they're younger, especially if they have ADHD or they're autistic. You want to do frequent verbal check-ins. I did this a lot when I was doing videos. So again, I would share my screen and I'd pull up a YouTube video. I had one kid at the beginning, she was really confused about coronavirus, what it was and how it was working. So I found some good videos, educational videos, and we pulled it up and we watched them together. But I did a lot of, oh my gosh, this is going so fast. I did a lot of check-ins with her. Do you understand what's going on? Did you have any questions about that? Things like that. Okay, some tips. Turning off smart devices, closing other browsers, because it's really tempting, I think, when you're sitting there and you hear your email go off. Oh, let me check the email real fast while the kid is doing this activity. You want to limit your distractions as much as possible. Close the browsers that you're not using. Plus, that would actually speed up your connection the less browsers you have going. Set up a space and routine, the familiarity for your clients that they know, okay, each session is going to be like this. And this is what we were talking about earlier, regards to having a time frame for your clients. So, you know, okay, our session's going to be 20 minutes today. Our session's going to be 15 minutes today, or whatever the client can handle. And also telling them, I told every single one of my clients, I work with primarily teens, but I told every single client, I'm starting at 3. I'm going to wait till 3:15. If you don't show up by then, I'm out and we're going to have to reschedule a new session. I'm not going to wait for the full hour for the client to not show up, but I do want to document that they were a no-show. You want to have your resources, websites, and tools ready to go before the session, just like you would in a face-to-face session. You want to make sure all those things are up and ready to go beforehand. You don't want to be scrambling to pull them up. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm talking a little bit faster, but we're running low on time. I don't want to get through some of these things. So consider showing your clients your space, moving the camera around, as this kind of helps build some familiarity, lets them know for sure that you're not alone. I would use a background of my own office from my school, so the kids kind of like that. They like kind of seeing my office. Miss Melinda, are you back in your office? Like, no, this is just a picture, but they like kind of seeing that. Establish a signal with your client if they're suddenly not alone. So you're having a conversation, and it's happened a lot. A lot of my clients are small houses, lots of family members, brother, sister, mom, dad come walking in. They don't really care if the kid is in a session or not. And then suddenly they were not alone. And so being able to let me know that they weren't alone was helpful. And we could move to using the chat function or something like that to be able to talk, or just pause and talk about something that was not as private necessarily. Feel free to share your screen, use the features. So a lot of these platforms have a lot of really cool resources and tools available to you. Use them, check them out, try them out, call up a family member and say, hey, can you be on the other side and let's practice some of these. So utilize some of these resources and these tools that are available to you. They come really in handy. Okay, so this is a video. I'm actually going to go ahead and skip the video because we don't have time and it's a full 5-minute video. So we're going to go ahead and skip this and go on to the next slide. All right, so what to actually do in a session. So these are some game sites that you can go in and create a private room with your client, and you and your client can play a game together and keep it a private room. So it's just you two playing, which is really fun and helpful, especially if your clients. You want to be able to keep the communication over your HIPAA compliant platform. So you don't want to talk, you would actually be setting up another tab, opening this up, creating the page, and setting up the room, and then, but still talking on your HIPAA compliant platform. I know that sounds really overwhelming, but there's a really cool website that has letsplaytherapy.org. So on that site, you can actually go and there's a bunch of tutorials that show you how to play a bunch of different games with clients in sessions online. Some of these tutorials are kind of long, but they're really good and helpful. So if you're like, I have no idea how to do any of that, like me, I had no idea how to do any of that at the beginning. Letsplaytherapy.org was really helpful in showing me how to do some of those things. And also letting your own kid teach you. They probably know. All right. So Art for Kids Hub is a YouTube channel. They literally have hundreds of step-by-step videos to teach you how to draw. This came really in handy with some of my autistic kids who weren't as verbal, but they really enjoyed drawing. And I'd pull it up, share the video, and we would draw a picture together. There is this channel here. I can't remember what it's called because it's a weird name here. I'm not going to try to say that, but they have different arts and crafts and activities that you can do with your clients. And if your clients have basic household stuff, they should be able to do any of these activities. And then origami. So again, just being able to, if a kid has a piece of paper, you can do origami. So these are all different activities you can do. These are a couple of my drawings that I am not good, and this is off of that Art Hub for Kids. And so I'm not very good at drawing, but you can see, I think these came out decent, not great, but decent. So if I can do this, anybody can do this. All right. Online social and emotional resources. So this is free for educators. You can also share this with your kids. Your teachers to also use. There's a lot of resources, activities, handouts, things like that on any of these pages. Just a fun joke about your feelings chart because we're all wearing masks and it's all hidden. Let's see, I Spy Game. Simon says, where's Waldo? Hiding a little toy behind you in your room and changing that every session and letting your kid find the game. It doesn't have to be Waldo, but find that little toy. Board games. If your kid has a board game, you can play together. There's online dice. You can do it that way. You can let your kid roll for you, move your pieces for you. You can play Sorry. You can play, any sort of any sort of game that if they have in the room, it's really easy to play a board game. Our different arts and crafts. These are all links to different online. Christian, can you give me time to download Christian's? Okay. These are online websites that help improve interactions. So Sketchbook allows you to draw pictures a little bit. It's a whiteboard that's a little bit more user-friendly than some. Wondershare allows you to make changes to PDFs or draw on PDFs. The board game template, I'm going to show you those in just a second. That actually just has some blank board game templates that you can create your own game and move little dots. You can dot it over. So these are just some really great resources and things that you can use. So this is what I was saying earlier, those sample, these are just blank game boards that you can use. And if you have the little drawing, you can just draw little dots. And as you play the game, using maybe questions from the ungame or something along that line, you can create your own little game to go through this to fit whatever you need to be. And they have dozens of different games, and they're all free to download. All right, so ADHD kids, you want to make sure you're taking frequent breaks. You want to make sure that you break into smaller chunks. Let's talk or do this for 5 minutes and take a 2-minute break, or 5 to 10 minutes, and kind of go through there. And you want to give them those times to give frequent breaks. You want to limit, you want to try new activities if the kid is, if your kid isn't interested in, is it done? I thought I saw 5 more minutes. Slides. So, okay. So let's go on to this. So you want to keep your kids engaged, and that's the big part. So toolkits. So I'm just going to go over these really fast because you guys already have the links when you download the slideshow. These are the trainings that I referenced earlier that that you can go through and get more information about law and ethics. These are great resources for just different tools and things that can help you with setting up telehealth, things to do and not do, things along that line. Illumi is one of the platforms, and actually if you check out some of these platform websites, a lot of them have some free resources that can help support you in getting telehealth set up that you don't have to buy another service to use. Some websites, again, some more games and activities, online games, bingo cards, things like that. So these are all things that I hope you guys are able to utilize and use for your services. Some YouTube pages. So these are some really good YouTube videos. They were about a half hour or an hour long that, again, really talked about how to engage teens and children in telehealth, regulation strategies or online, increasing engagement and things like that. So these are those videos. I got a lot of my information from them. And I don't know about you, hopefully you don't feel like this at this point. I know I stormed through the last half, and that's where I really wanted to spend the majority of my time. So I'm very sorry. But just please keep in mind that grad school didn't prepare you for this. College didn't prepare you for this, didn't prepare you to be a sudden telehealth therapist in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. So this is a huge change for all of us, for your clients, for us, and there's a lot going on. So what I hoped to do today was just kind of narrow it down for you so that you can continue to take the next steps from here, that you can continue to look into things for yourself. It couldn't be a be-all, end-all of information. It just needed to be just, here we go to start it off because it's such a short time period. But I hope I gave you a lot of resources and tools that you can continue to look into it on your own time. And I hope I answered your questions enough that gave you some clarity and a little bit of comfort to be able to know that we're all doing the best we can in a time like this. And so as long as we're covering our bases legally and ethically, then give yourself some grace, give yourself a little bit of time to learn and understand these things, and give your clients some grace as well, as this is all new to them and there's a lot of changes happening. I apologize for that last half being so fast. I didn't really want to rush to that fast, but it's hard to gauge this stuff on just an hour. So I hope this was informational for you and supportive for you. I think it's going to shut off automatically in a couple of minutes. Does anybody have any last minute questions that I can throw out in the next 60 seconds? All right, good. Yeah, so I just think that I really advise you to go back and make sure you download that briefcase when you're logging in. You want to download my slideshow from there because then you'll get access to all the links that I provided. And the links are really where all the information is at so that you can continue to move forward and support yourself and getting going and getting yourself those tools. I really love some of these tools in these games. They really help the sessions go, especially if you have kids who are younger, kids that are older. There's a wide range in there. So just go through and see what fits. And the Art Hub was really helpful for me and using it with a lot of my kids. Okay. Oh, okay. Visit the help desk if you can't find the presentation. If you're unable to find it, you can go to the help desk. All right, guys, I have less than a minute to go. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for joining. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference. I know everyone's worked really hard to put this together for you guys. I hope to see you guys in person next summer.